Imagine trying to fall asleep in a massive stone fortress during the dead of winter. The walls are 3 feet thick, there's no central heating, and outside a bitter wind howls through the darkness. This was the nightly reality for countless people living in medieval castles across Europe. So how did they possibly survive those freezing nights without modern heating systems? The answer is far more ingenious than you might think, involving a combination of architectural design, clever use of materials, and sleeping arrangements that would seem utterly bizarre to us today. Let's start with the castle itself. Those enormous stone walls that make castles so iconic were actually part of the problem. Stone is terrible at retaining heat. It absorbs warmth during the day and radiates it away at night. Medieval builders knew this, which is why they employed several architectural tricks to combat the cold. First, they used tapestries, and we're not talking about thin decorative pieces. Medieval tapestries were thick, heavy textile barriers that could weigh hundreds of pounds. These weren't just hung for decoration. They created an insulating air gap between the freezing stone walls and the interior living space. The wealthier the lord, the more elaborate and numerous the tapestries. Some castles had multiple layers of tapestries, essentially creating medieval double glazing. The air trapped between the tapestry and the wall acted as an insulator, preventing the bone-chilling cold from seeping directly into the living space. In the grandest castles, you might find tapestries depicting biblical scenes, hunting expeditions, or family heraldry, but their primary purpose was always warmth, not decoration. But tapestries alone weren't enough. Castle architects designed rooms with remarkably small windows, often just narrow slits. While this had defensive advantages, it also minimized heat loss. When winter arrived, these windows would be covered with wooden shutters, and in some cases, oiled cloth or thin sheets of animal horn that allowed some light through while blocking the wind. The wealthy might even stuff the gaps around windows with cloth or straw to prevent drafts. Glass windows were extraordinarily rare and expensive, reserved only for churches and the homes of the richest nobles, and even then they were small and thick. Now, here's where things get interesting. The fireplace. Medieval fireplaces were absolutely massive, sometimes large enough for a person to stand inside. These weren't just for show. A great hall fireplace could burn logs 6 feet long, creating enough heat to warm a substantial space. The wealthy would keep fires burning throughout the night, with servants tasked with maintaining them. Some castles employed a firekeeper whose entire job was ensuring fires never went out. But here's the catch. Most castle residents didn't sleep in the Great Hall. So what about the bedchambers? Noble bedchambers had their own fireplaces, but fuel was expensive. Wood had to be chopped, transported and stored. It represented a significant portion of a castle's operating costs. A large castle could burn through several cords of wood per day during winter. Forests near castles were carefully managed resources, and the right to gather firewood was a privilege that could be granted or revoked. This meant fires in private chambers were often only lit in the evening and allowed to die down overnight to conserve fuel. This is where medieval bedding becomes crucial. The beds themselves were nothing like what we use today. A nobleman's bed was essentially a wooden frame supporting a lattice of ropes or leather straps, topped with a straw mattress, then a feather mattress, then multiple layers of woolen blankets and fur coverlets. The very wealthy might have had beds with 4 posts and heavy curtains all around, essentially creating a small insulated room within the room. These beds were so valuable they were often mentioned specifically in wills and inheritance documents. A high-quality bed could cost as much as a year's wages for a skilled craftsman. These bed curtains weren't decorative. They were survival equipment. When drawn, they trapped body heat and created a warm microclimate inside the bed. Some historical accounts describe the air inside these curtained beds as stifling, even when the room itself was freezing. People would sleep in woolen nightshirts and caps. Yes, nightcaps were actually functional, not just a quaint tradition. Since we lose significant heat through our heads, covering it while sleeping was essential. The wealthy might also wear woolen socks or even fur-lined slippers to bed. But what about everyone else? This is the uncomfortable truth about medieval castle life. Most people didn't have these luxuries. Servants, guards, and lower-ranking household members had drastically different sleeping arrangements. Many slept in communal spaces, packed together for warmth. This wasn't pleasant, but it was practical. Shared body heat could raise the temperature significantly. Some servants slept on straw pallets on the floor of the great hall, huddled near the dying embers of the central fire. Others might sleep in the corridors, in storage rooms, or even in the stables with the animals, whose body heat provided genuine warmth. Guards on night watch had perhaps the worst situation. They would wear multiple layers of wool clothing and fur-lined cloaks. Some castles had small guard rooms with braziers, metal containers holding burning coals. Though these presented a serious fire hazard in enclosed spaces, night watchmen would often pace constantly, using movement to stay warm. Frostbite and exposure-related illnesses were genuine occupational hazards. In the coldest regions, guards might work in shorter shifts to prevent hypothermia. Kitchen workers had an unexpected advantage. Medieval castle kitchens generated enormous amounts of heat from bread ovens and cooking fires that rarely went completely cold. Baking bread was an all-day affair, and ovens retained heat for hours. Sleeping near or above the kitchen was a coveted position in the winter months. Some castles were designed with living quarters for favoured servants directly above the kitchen, taking advantage of the rising heat. The head cook often had private quarters adjacent to the kitchen, ensuring they could monitor the fires and prevent accidents. When cold became unbearable, people resorted to bed warmers. Long-handled metal pans filled with hot coals that were moved between the sheets before sleeping. These could warm a bed sufficiently for the initial hours of sleep, though they posed obvious fire risks and required servants to prepare them. The truly desperate might even heat stones by the fire, wrap them in cloth, and place them at the foot of the bed as makeshift hot water bottles. Some inventive souls would heat bricks and place them inside wooden boxes lined with fabric, creating safer warming devices. Medieval people also understood the value of strategic room placement. The solar, the lord's private chamber, was often positioned on the south side of the castle to maximize sun exposure during the day. Rooms were stacked vertically when possible, with heat rising from lower levels helping to warm upper chambers. The Great Hall was frequently located on the second floor, with storage or animal stables below, providing additional insulation and ambient heat. There's also an architectural feature that often gets overlooked: the garderobe, or medieval toilet. These were essentially shafts built into the castle walls with a seat at the top dropping waste down to a pit or moat below. Interestingly, many garderobes were positioned adjacent to bedchambers, not just for convenience, but because the decomposing waste below generated a small amount of heat through bacterial activity. The shaft also created air circulation that, when properly managed with a wooden door, could help regulate temperature. The truth is, medieval people didn't sleep comfortably through winter nights the way we do. They adapted their expectations and their bodies to the cold. They slept in shorter cycles, often waking in the middle of the night during what was called first sleep and second sleep, with a wakeful period in between. This wasn't insomnia. It was the natural human sleep pattern before artificial lighting changed everything. During that middle-of-the-night wakeful period, people might stoke fires, pray, engage in quiet activities, or simply huddle under blankets waiting for dawn. The harsh reality is that many people, especially the poor and the elderly, didn't survive particularly cold winters. Hypothermia was a genuine danger, as were respiratory illnesses like pneumonia that thrived in cold, damp conditions. Medieval death records show spikes in mortality during harsh winters, particularly among castle servants and the lower classes. So the next time you adjust your thermostat or complain about a drafty window, remember, you're experiencing luxury that medieval kings would have envied. Those stone fortresses weren't cozy homes. They were survival challenges that required constant effort, significant resources, and a tolerance for discomfort that most of us today simply couldn't imagine enduring.